had planned. I know that those happy accidents come along, and I'm very grateful for them. I have other examples throughout that perhaps I'll point out. The happy accident factor. Now, I've been asked on occasion why there was a title change, just the camera or where to point it or how to stage the actors. I find that there's an enormous advantage in preparing as thoroughly as possible. Things will change. That flux will happen. The universe will try to work against you, but at least you will have a basis from which to proceed.
Name taken in vain in my prison. The other rules, you'll figure out as you go along. Any questions?
This is a room there in the prison. The one thing you have to kind of picture here is how trashed this prison was. It had been an active place for 100 years, and they were just about to start tearing down those walls when we came along and said, "Oh, can we please shoot a movie here? Will you delay this a year?" We went into this place with it having been deactivated some years before, and it was trashed. These walls looked like there was strips of paint hanging everywhere, every square foot of this. It looked like an explosion in a confetti factory. In fact, there's a wonderful documentary that's going to be on the supplemental disc of this DVD by Mark Kermode and his colleagues. There is some footage of Mark actually in the real cell block of them, pretty much there for us to use. And coming up here is Frank's very first fight scene as a director. Here we go. It's very thrilling. Okay, Die Hard it's not. I understand that. But thought everybody acquitted themselves rather nicely here. In the rape here of Andy, I always thought I really wanted to have the camera sort of leave, like sort of a Victorian lady averting her eyes from something really unpleasant. I figured the really raw, male rape of all time had already been done in Deliverance. And indeed, the tonality of this particular film didn't seem to lend itself to that. So I thought, let's just leave certain things to the viewer's imagination.
But we all knew. Things went on like that for a while. Prison life consists of routine, and then more routine.
Look, this snow here, this snow, potato flakes. I knew that somewhere in the movie I absolutely had to have, I mean, it spans, 20 years? I thought I had to have one scene in snow, just for passage of time's sake. We shot that one day in the shadow of the prison yard. Actually, it was a really bright sunny day, but we shot in the shadow, and we had tons of potato flakes being blown through by fans, just to help texturally the film a little bit, in terms of that passage of time.
But then in the spring of 1949, the powers that be decided that...
An enigmatic himself. He's got this intelligence that you can't quite know what's going on behind his eyes. And that was just a great match of actor and role.
You're gonna look funnier sucking my dick.
Here you're about to see an example of some prehistoric CGI from the early Mesozoic, I think, is when we did this. I always knew that I wanted in this scene to have a high-angle shot that would show you how high these guys are, right on the edge. This is the shot here. I always knew I wanted this shot. Then I wanted to come down and show you that it wasn't a couple of stuntmen, it was actually my leads. And so these guys were safety cabled rather tightly. In fact, you would see the safety cables here attached to Tim Robbins' chest and also to Clancy Brown's back, had they not been digitally erased. I remember we had so much trouble getting those damn cables erased because it was still kind of early days. We were a low-budget movie, and we'd get these shots in, and they just didn't work. DreamQuest would say, "We're going to buy new software next week. We promise it'll work, it'll work." And finally, they were right. It did work. It worked well enough, let me put it that way. Of course, at the same time, the same year that this was released, so was Forrest Gump, and I saw that they had erased Gary Sinise's legs in every shot, and I thought, damn it! So that's what a real budget buys you. I get it, okay. And by the way, that actor right there on screen right, who's laughing right now, that's Paul McCrane. He's another alumnus of The Blob from 1988 that I co-wrote with Chuck Russell and that Chuck directed.
What are you, Jimmy, staring at?
Coming up here, I think we have a really fantastic example, probably the best example of the use of voiceover, technical use of voiceover narration in the movie. I don't know how other people have done it. I don't know that I've particularly invented this. I'm sure somebody else has done it. But you'll notice, watch this shot here, starting from Larry Brandenburg up there, past Joe Ragno and David Proval. What we have here is voiceover narration that is matching the duration of the shot perfectly. There's even going to be a gap in the narration. When Clancy walks in, he has a line of dialogue. Then the narration picks up again. Camera comes around and finds Morgan Freeman. At the end of the narration, Morgan Freeman is going to glance off to Tim Robbins. Well, the reason this worked is we pre-recorded every line of voiceover narration in the entire movie before we started shooting. I would literally have Willie, my location mixer, play back these bits of narration while we were shooting, almost like you play back music in a music video. Because I realized there was so much of it, voiceover in the movie, and so much of what we were shooting had to be designed specifically to time with voiceover. Whether it's passage of years, a number of shots that voiceover covers, or whether it's something like this, I knew that I couldn't have a shot that was longer than I needed or shorter than I needed. So that's what we did. We did a pre-record of Morgan's. And the irony of that, of course, is that we did it in some little mom-and-pop recording studio there in Ohio. Morgan came in and literally read through it once. He just, page by page, read through every bit of voiceover once as we record.
Take a walk.
I gotta change the rear.
I said fuck off!
Now here we have some rather interesting, odd little effects in terms of the editing, the sound editing that Richard did here.
Ain't you gonna scream?
Ain't you gonna scream? That sounds like he's replying to what's going on the movie, Gilda. The question to the answer was, what do you say to the bride? And Mark says, ain't you gonna scream? Some nice, just clever little editing touches, again, by Richard Francis Bruce. If you're listening to what's being said in Gilda, there are those little echoes woven in between Gilda and our movie.
Fly. And you're gonna swallow what I give you to swallow. And when you swallow mine, you're gonna swallow Rooster's. You done broke his nose. I think you ought to have something to show for it.
Anything you put in my mouth, you're gonna lose.
No. You'll understand. You do that, and I'll put all 8 inches of the steel in your ear.
All right. But you should know that sudden
It's
serious...
actually a really nice example of Roger Deakins' very subtle lighting here. Look how shaded Mark Ralston's eyes are in this with his hat, and yet you can see so much detail within that shaded part. There's nothing that you're missing from his eyes. A really amazing knack that man has for painting with light, I think.
Honey, you shouldn't.
And this is poor Tom Morga doubling for Tim, getting the hell beat out of him. Even though they're pulling their punches and pulling their kicks, you still have to go a certain degree to sell it. Poor Tom got a little black and blue that night.
Boggs spent a week in the hole.
By this music and the tears that brought to my eyes. And this whole scene just really sprang from that. I thought, well, we're going to play a little jazz here. We're just going to work a scene into this movie based on this emotional reaction that I had listening to this music while I was writing and see what happens. Fascinatingly enough, this has become really a signature scene for the movie. So many people come up to me and say, oh, I love the scene where he plays the opera, the opera, the opera. What a nice result that is. That emotional reaction that I had, I was able to pass on to the people who viewed the movie and share that with them, and it worked for them. As a sidelight, the specific performance also made quite a difference. When I first told people we're going to be using this music for this part of the movie, they went out and bought a version of it. And that's what they first played back for me, and it wasn't the same at all. And I said, no, we've got to use the exact same piece that I wrote to. It has to be the same vocalists, the same conductor, literally that performance. And that's when the magic came back into the sequence. Here again are Mansfield extras. These guys, man, they worked their asses off, these fellas, all summer long. A lot of these guys, Mansfield is something of it's a smallish city. It's in the Rust Belt, post-industrial Midwest, and a lot of these guys were out of work. They were steel workers, worked in the brass works, et cetera, and they were really happy that our production came to town because we were able to provide some work to a lot of these folks, and they came every day willing and so anxious to do a fantastic job for us, and indeed they did.
Frame, open this door!
Turn that off!
Here's an inspired bit of action in the movie where the warden is telling Andy to turn the music off, and instead he turns it up. And that we have to credit to Mr. Tim Robbins. That was his idea. You never know where a great idea is going to come from, and when you're willing to listen to those ideas, you have a little gem of a moment like that. That's all Tim.
You're mine now.
And Clancy, of course, really enjoyed busting the window in. That's just the kind of guy Clancy is.
Andy got 2 weeks in the hole for that little stunt.
On your feet.